So originally he was going to come in person, but he has a Secret Service detail and a bunch of other things, and it was short notice, and it's really hard to get a flight for 60 people on short notice. I offered him a jet, but they can't use it for campaign finance. So he's going to dial in, and we're going to make this a heck of a lot of fun. And I got my phone here because I actually wrote questions down. You know me, how much I like PowerPoints and writing things down, all these things. It's a joke. I do not write things down. But I'll do my best. I'm not a very good interviewer. All right, I can't hear or see Bobby. So AV guys, where are we at? Here we go. Can you hear us, Bobby?
Then I can't speak.
Mr. Kennedy, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Charles.
Ah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, the way I'm oriented, I can't quite see you, but I'm going to look on over. Oh, there he is. Okay. All right, we got all the AV stuff sorted out. So first off, thank you so much for spending some time with us over here in Vegas. This is just a treat and honor for me. Quick story about my background. My grandparents on my mom's side were huge supporters of your uncle. In fact, in their house, I was told by my mother that my grandmother had two pictures. She was Italian Catholic, so you got to have a picture of the Pope. That's just what you did in the 60s. We had, I think it was John the 23rd back then, and one of JFK. And so it's been something that's been in our family legacy for a very, very long time. And it was such a hopeful and incredible time. And it's an honor to be with somebody who's had a front row seat to the American story since the early 60s and witnessed all the things that have changed and the things that haven't changed. This fireside chat, I wanted to talk a bit about economic, political, and social systems because that's what we do in the cryptocurrency industry. And I wanted to start on the social side. And in particular, given the theme of your campaign of restoring integrity to American institutions and the health of our people, my first question is about the gap between the legacy media, the media we all grew up with, and the new media that's been forming. So you're doing really well in the new media. Joe Rogan loves you, and a lot of people online love you. That's how most people have discovered your candidacy. But the legacy media has been, to be blunt, exceedingly harsh and dismissive. And while the new media continues to grow astoundingly, what I'm trying to figure out is how do we bridge these two things? Having watched the American media change over the past few decades, what challenges and problems should our industry try to work on? Because this is a room filled with a whole bunch of people whose day job is to solve problems. And you've had a front row seat to where the media has been very good and where it's not been so good. And my hope is you can kind of draw upon your wisdom and your experience to give us some advice on problems we need to solve so that people can get a fair shake.
Thank you, Charles. And I want to, you know how hard I tried to make it to Las Vegas. I'm very sad that I can't be there with you. Really wanted to do this event, but I'm on the Cape today. We had a bunch of meetings here and fundraisers, etc., that we could not change. So anyway, I apologize for not being there. I'm very grateful to you for giving me this opportunity. In my experience with the media, as you pointed out, has been pretty bad with the mainstream media. I do very well. I'm beating both President Trump and President Biden. I was beating him. There haven't been recent polls measuring me against Vice President Harris, but I've been beating both the Democrat and Republican nominees. Among independent voters, which is now the largest cohort, and among young people, so people under 35, and in some polls, all Americans under 45. And that is, as you pointed out, because those are the cohorts who are watching long-form interviews. They're the customers of alternative media. They're watching Joe Rogan, they're watching Lex Friedman and Aubrey Marcus and Tucker Carlson. But I do very poorly among baby boomers, and I should do well among them. That's the cohort, like your parents and grandparents who remember the Kennedy era, felt part of Camelot, feel nostalgic about it. The reason I don't do well with them, we believe, is because they never see me. They hear a lot of defamations and pejoratives about me on the mainstream media, but the mainstream media will not give me an interview. So I've only had 2 live interviews in 19 months on mainstream media. One on ABC and one with Aaron Burnett. And then I've had 3 taped interviews. So 5 interviews altogether in 19 months on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and MSNBC, on all of them combined. And that really is not a. And then, of course, they won't let me. They're controlling the debate, so they won't let me on the debate stage. So it's kind of deprived the American people of hearing from the candidates who have different alternative vision. Anybody who's outside of the duopoly of the Republican Democrats, the American people won't hear from them. How did this happen? Because this would never have happened back in the era that your grandmother and that I grew up in. And there were actually rules that controlled the media that were written in 1928 when we passed the Communications Act at the dawn of commercial radio, where people understood that both Republicans and Democrats, that radio and later television was going to change the American political landscapes, because if they could be controlled by 1 or 2 large corporations, those corporations would be able to really dictate the perception that people had of the world, and ultimately dictate policies that would benefit their mercantile interests. So, and they would also feed into demagoguery, that the government's totalitarian elements and demagogues, if they got control of those media voices, they could control the American public. And so they passed these rules, including the Fairness Doctrine, which said that the media could not be controlled by in each market, there had to be different media voices. So there was a limit to how many newspapers you could own, how many television stations you could own, how many radios you could own, radio stations. And so they wanted a multiplicity of voices, diversity of voices, and they wanted to make sure that there was local control, and that there was fairness, so that the national networks, which were operating on publicly owned airwaves, the airwaves don't belong to the networks, they belong to the American people. The networks were licensed to use them, but there were requirements that they put on news every day at hours that most people would be home. The radio stations had to do it every 15 minutes, and they had to be fair about the news. So, and if they didn't, they would lose their license. So consumers could sue them and say, you're only telling one side. Those laws were abolished, and essentially effectively abolished in the early 1980s during the Reagan administration. And then the news divisions of those big companies became captive to the profit centers. Well, they now, before that, the networks would hire individuals who were very prestigious, who were trusted by all Americans, like Walter Cronkite, to be on the news divisions, people like Newton, whose integrity was under question, and they would run it, and they would have their own show, and they were money losers to the network. The network was willing to lose money because that was their ticket for keeping the network. After the 80s, the news centers became profit centers, and they no longer had to tell the truth, and that's where we are today. So, what I would say to you is the reaction of the government has been to censor us. And I feel like over the past 3 years, particularly, we've all been subject to a psyop. We're being told the big enemy of America is misinformation. But there's always been misinformation on the media, and there's always been lies, and the First Amendment protects lies, it protects misinformation. The real danger to me is if government controls the information flow. And that is when they make us all scared of misinformation. It gives government the capacity now to say, well, we need to control, we need to be the gatekeeper. We need to tell you what's true and what's not. And of course, they're not telling you the truth. They're telling you their version of the truth. And I'll close just by saying this. There's a famous writer called George Martin who said that government does not tear out a man's tongue because they're scared he'll tell a lie. Government tears out his tongue because they're scared he'll tell the truth. And if you look what happened during COVID, and this happened during the past couple of years, the people who are getting censored are the people who are telling the truth. That's what the government doesn't want you to hear. It's not the people who are passing misinformation. In fact, the primary propagator of misinformation has been the government itself.
Yeah, and that's such an important point. You took us on a journey from when media was perceived in the commons as a public service and a loss leader, and then in the 80s it turns into a profit center and it turns into a business. And like any business, there's economy of scale. So it goes from a decentralized business to a consolidated business, and now you have a small oligarch of people with perverse incentives, and they completely control the narrative. And then,
and by the way, there are now 5 giant corporations that control virtually all the radio stations in our country, all the newspapers in our country, all the television stations in our country, and most of the large internet content providers and all the billboards. And so there's 5 guys ultimately who are deciding what we hear is truth. And the rise of the social media is like an insurgency, and it's a wonderful thing. But I think the question you pose is good one. How do we keep those sources? How do we control them? How do we make them tell the truth? The truth that they're never going to tell the truth. My kids know not to believe what's on the internet. Sometimes I get fooled by some AI meme or something, and I send it to my kids and say, "Did you see this?" They say, "Dad, that's a fake." So they know that. Judge Learned Hand said the remedy for misinformation and for bad information is more information. It's not censorship. It's flooding. It's a diversity of voices that will call out lies on the internet that everybody, also an intelligent population that is critically reading the internet.
Yeah, and that's one of the superpowers of our industry, and I'm very glad that we have a chance to engage with people running for office, is that we're all about deconsolidation, disintermediation, decentralization, and at the core of it, marketplaces for truth. When you think about Bitcoin, it's a giant weighing machine to basically create one common truth amongst everybody that uses the network. And I often think, how do we create marketplaces to verify if information's right or wrong and actually predict it? And almost like Wall Street, where if you bet right, you make money. If you bet on something and it turns out to be true, you make money. And if you lie, you lose money. It would be really cool to see if we can apply market forces in that respect. Okay, so the second thing I'd love to chat with you about, and this is something that's unique to your running mate, and I don't think she gets enough airtime, even though she's a brilliant woman and has an amazing background. It's on the political side, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart and near and dear to the industry's heart. So your running mate, Nicole Shanahan, she's affiliated with Stanford Law. In particular, she works at Codex, which is a group at Stanford Law that specializes in something called computational law. So very similar to smart contracts, but the basic idea is that you take everyday law that's written down on paper, humans read it, and you write it in a way that machines can read it, they can understand it. And so obviously our industry is doing this because we have to write smart contracts for DeFi and for all the amazing things that come. And the reason why I think this is such an important topic is that I recently read a book from Justice Gorsuch, and the book was entitled Overruled. And he was talking about the creep of laws in society. In fact, on average, the federal government passes about 344 laws annually. It depends on the season. And if you sum up the amount of prose, it's about 2 to 3 million pages of laws. And that's in addition to what we already have. The U.S. tax code, for example, is over 1 million pages. And when you really think about this, it creates a reality where most people inadvertently, according to Justice Gorsuch, commit at least one felony a day. It's not so good. So there's even a book, I think, called 3 Felonies a Day. And what this does is it disproportionately harms the poor and minorities because they don't have the ability to get legal representation to go and understand what's going on. So the law oftentimes gets weaponized against people. And early in your career, you were an environmentalist lawyer. Imagine you ran into this a lot where people took advantage of the arcane, complex legal system, which was much simpler in the 1980s than it is today in 2024. So my question is, do you think there's an opportunity for some of our industry's innovations to explore automating the American legal system and to remove inconsistencies, contradictions, loopholes, and biases? And I wanted to give this as an opportunity for you to kind of go into your own background and things you encountered while fighting for environmental justice and dealing with large actors that try to weaponize the legal system. And we as an industry, what can we do to help make this a more fair system for everyone?
Yeah, and you're right about it. The system being rigged against the poor. Not only that, it is rigged to benefit the rich because they're the ones that are writing those laws. I think there's something like 4 million pages of laws that are written every year, and there's and it's. The people writing them are, of course, the senators and congressmen. Right now, it costs $300 million to run a Senate campaign in New York. So if you're a senator if you want to run, you're spending all day long dialing for dollars to the richest people in America. There was a report, Charles, that came out this week that showed that half the political campaigns that are given, the total number of political campaigns, total number of contributions to political campaigns, that 50% of it comes from the 861 people. So if you want to know who's running America, if you want to know who the deep state is, that's who it is. And there's been it was for 100 years, it was illegal for corporations to donate to federal political candidates. We passed that law in 2008. We really rescued democracy at that time. That law stood for 102 years, and it was overruled in the Citizens United case in 2010. And the Citizens United case said that donations are a form of free speech, that they're protected by the First Amendment, and therefore it's illegal to restrict them. And that law released a tsunami of money into the federal political process. So in my election right now that I'm running in, I'm going to raise about, for my campaign, maybe $100 million with the super PACs on my campaign combined. But the other campaigns, there's going to be $15 billion spent. And that money is mainly coming from millionaires and billionaires. And they're writing the laws out. Just briefly to answer, Nicole is a genius on this stuff, and I'm not sure how it will apply the civil law or criminal law. Part of the problem with the law is it's not our access to them, which we could get through blockchain, but they're just indecipherable to start off with, and they're unfair. They're bad laws. I think the most promising from my point of view, from my kind of limited understanding, is, as you say, smart contracts. If I want to make a contract with somebody where, let's say, I say, you pay me $100 if the price of oil hits $100, that contract, normally there'd be all kinds of frictions writing that, because you'd have to put money in escrow and you'd have to pay a bank, and there's accountants involved and there's brokers involved. And if you can just do that transaction between two human beings with no friction and where there's an automatic payment, so there's no risk of default, there's no cost of collection, it saves huge amounts of money, and it makes us all richer because it makes the cost of transaction more efficient and slow. I mean, and lower.
Yeah, and from my viewpoint, I think of it like a software engineer, where I say if you could get a machine to understand the law, you could write tests and debug the law. So you could look for loopholes, contradictions, and this is especially important in the tax code, where basically people are paid millions of dollars to find loopholes so that they could benefit people to not pay taxes or to lower their tax rate. Well, you see it in every place, and there's nothing worse in life when you have contradictions and you have regulatory agencies that basically tell you the opposite things. And it's never clear for me, like, who's actually in charge. A great example would be the Department of Justice is suing SpaceX, I guess because they're not hiring their non-citizens. But on the other hand, they have military contracts and they work with the DoD and their employees require security clearances. So one agency says you're not allowed to hire non-citizens. The other agency is suing them for not hiring non-citizens. It's kind of a weird paradox to be in, where the federal government tells you opposite things and it's not clear which winner you're supposed to pick.
Yeah, well, that's I don't know. I can't imagine how RareEvo would how even with blockchain applied to that, understanding the complexities of it, how you fix it, because we have a constitution. Congress has the law. As long as Congress is owned by big corporations and wealthy people, we're going to get laws that are rigged against the rest of us.
Right, but at least we could know where the contradictions are and where the injustices are, so we have a bug list, and whether we can actually fix the code or debug it or not, at least we know that there's a problem there. So I want to pivot a bit, and this is the meat and potatoes of our industry, the economic side. That I know you recently spoke at Bitcoin 2024, and you outlined several policies there, including a strategic Bitcoin reserve composed of full seize to purchase Bitcoin, and also you proposed tax policy like expanding 1031 rules to cover cryptocurrencies. And our industry, going beyond those proposals, we have kind of two broad regulatory great areas, and they're causing everybody in this room and rooms like this a lot of heartburn. The first regulatory concern is asset classification, and this is really just the regulator concern for the majority of the things we do. If you go and talk to Gary Gensler and you go and talk to the Biden administration, they seem to be of an opinion that everything that walks is a security. And the challenge is that securities law is not really fit for purpose. A lot of people in our industry have been having discussions about maybe we should have cryptocurrencies be commodities and regulate them under the CFTC. And so the first question is for you to kind of channel your grandfather, because I think not a lot of people in the room know that I think your grandfather was the founding chairman of the SEC. This is something that's near and dear to your family's legacy of kind of establishing this entire regulatory system. And instead of going into, let's say, specifics like do you support FIT 21 or FIA, or how do you think about building effective regulation for frontier industries? Because the next president's not just dealing with blockchain, they're dealing with quantum computers and the rise of AI and synthetic biology and all these new business models. And it's unrealistic to say, well, everybody has to be an expert on everything and then come down to the mountaintop like Moses with tablets and solve the problem. Rather, it has to be more of a problem-solving philosophy. And I was hoping that the crowd here could become a bit acquainted with how you think about developing regulations, especially in frontier agencies, and so we can finally get to clarity of whether something's a security or a commodity, who's in the room, how do they get into that room, and then how do we build bipartisan consensus for that?
Yeah, my grandfather was a Wall Street outsider, so he came from Boston. He was an Irish Catholic. He had to leave Boston because at that time the financial clubhouse in Boston was the ecosystem was dominated by Brahmin wasps, and he was well. So he went to New York, and he loved the freedom of New York. He was still not on the insider stuff, but he figured out the tricks for how to manipulate stocks, and Roosevelt named him because he knew the tricks. Roosevelt named him as the first chair of the SEC. My grandfather did not want to dismantle Wall Street. He loved free market capitalism. He wanted to release the energies of the marketplace. But he also wanted to make it be fair to the little guy, and he understood if the little guy was going to invest, he had to know the system wasn't rigged. We developed disclosure rules. We developed anti-fraud rules and conflicts of interest rules to make it work in a way, but not to burden the market, but rather to guarantee that the market would actually function in a way that was not corporate crony capitalism, but was true free market capitalism. And he succeeded in doing that, and he saved Wall Street from itself. Today, you have a government that is doing the opposite. They're trying to pick winners and losers, and unfortunately, they're extremely impossible to Bitcoin and to cryptos. And we should pass. We should pass FID 21, FID 21. We should repeal SAB 121 or which both houses of Congress tried to do. SAB 121, which both houses of Congress tried to do, and then that was vetoed by the administration. And this administration was very, very hostile to it. Gary Gensler lost 3 cases: the Ripple case, the Grayscale case, and also the debt box case, which the Utah judge took the unusual step of sanctioning SEC. SEC has exposed itself not only as biased, but also incompetent and unfair. And I think what the industry needs, what the industry wants, is just certainty. They want to be able. There's certain times that crypto should be regulated as a commodity, and other times that they should be regulated as a security. We should have rules that clearly delineate that so that people have certainty. And that, unfortunately, it's not what we're getting. I'm very much a libertarian on these issues. I think that we should have a minimum, minimize the amount of rules. We should give certainty, and we should encourage the market to pick its own winners and losers and not have the government doing that.
And are you a fan of self-regulatory organizations? And how would you like to work with industry, especially frontier industries, and more broadly, just beyond blockchain, looking to quantum computing and AI and all these other things that the next president is not only going to have to deal with, is going to make decisions that have consequences in the trillions of dollars and many lives. How would a President Kennedy work with the broader industry as a whole, and what type of relationship do you want to have with industry?
My objective is to bring those industries to make the United States the hub of those industries, to allow them to flourish here and to build wealth in our country. There's no way that we can deal with this $35 trillion debt by cutting our way out of it. We have to grow our GDP, and there are a few ways to grow GDP, but the best way is with new industries, the same way that we did with Silicon Valley back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And we're driving these industries out of our country. In Switzerland over the past year, or 2 years, there's been, I think, 1,200 new cryptocurrencies registered, and the value is about $360 billion. They should be here in our country. We shouldn't be driving these industries to Switzerland and Singapore and Dubai and China and Russia, etc. We should be hosting them here. We should be making them feel safe. We should be working with the industry leaders, which is what I will do, to devise rules that are safe, that protect the consumer from fraud and overreach, but also and minimize the burden on these companies and allow them to release the entrepreneurial energies and make this a very, very friendly ecosystem for us.
Okay, so I think we got applause there. Okay, so final question: if people are listening to you, they're hearing you, they really love what they hear. How can they help? How can they help make a President Kennedy and get us out of this bipartisan madness? Where do they go? What do they do? What help do you need?
People should go to our website, thekennedy24.com. Right now, we do need money. We're fighting lawsuits. We're within 2 weeks, we'll be on the ballot in every state. We're on the ballot. We've got enough signatures already for, I think, 48 states and the District of Columbia. So we need 2 more states where we're being sued. And those lawsuits, by the DNC, in every one of these lawsuits, we won 3 more this week: New Jersey, North Carolina, and I think it was Maryland. And but I'm going to be in court all this week. I'm going to be testifying in New York. I'm going to be testifying in Philadelphia, which takes my time. That I should be going to rallies and fundraisers. Anything anybody can do to help support the cost of those lawsuits. And we need to break this to up. We need an alternative in this country. If we elect the current candidates, we're going to get more of the same. We know what we're going to get. We're going to get more debt. They're the ones who ran up these 2 administrations, ran up $8 trillion each. And we're going to get more wars. We're going to get more division, more anger, more hatred, more polarization. And this is a critical time in history because of the growth of AI, because of the growth of blockchain. These industries could go either way. They can become mechanisms for democratizing our society, for making government more accountable, more transparent, or they can be weapons used by the government as tools of totalitarianism, to clamp down totalitarian controls, to alter our very reality, to control and monitor and surveil us. And we need a president of the White House and a vice president like Nicole Shanahan who understands both the perils and the promise of AI, of blockchain, of computational technologies, and all of these other technologies that are coming down the road to us, and are going to have the capacity, are going to definitely change our world. And we need somebody there who's thinking about this 24 hours a day about how to make sure it changes our world for the better and not for the worse.
So there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for being with us. And just to everybody, whether you're Republican or Democrat, 100% of our problems in America were caused by either Republicans or Democrats. And that's why Kennedy is the remedy. Thank you for spending this time with us. It's a great honor. I love having you here.
I'm going to light it on fire when I get in there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.